All right, so in this video, I'm going to talk about increasing, decreasing, and constant functions. And over here, I have somewhat of a trapezoid, right, without the bottom. And if I ask you, where is the function increasing? You have to think of your graph going from left to right. I would point right here, right? I mean, this is where I would point, going from left to right, right? It's increasing. If I ask you, where's the function constant? You would say it's right here, right, in this region. If I say, where is it decreasing? You would say right here, okay? Again, that's why it's important to go from left to right, because if you go from right to left, right, you could say this is increasing, this is constant, and this part is decreasing, right? But again, going from left to right. Okay, so that's the big picture, but, how do we, how would I describe it in words? So I would say for... or symbols, for x1, right, is less than x2. Okay, so just in this first interval right here, we know it's increasing, right? If the y value of x1, we'll call it f of x1, is less than the y value of x2, then we say f is increasing, okay? I'll just say inc, on the interval x1 comma x2. Okay, so this guy right here is the interval. You always talk about x intervals of where the function is increasing. Okay. All right, so that is where it's increasing, right? It's increasing on x1 comma x2. Don't worry about brackets. You always put parentheses when you're talking about the interval is increasing, decreasing, or constant. All right, so if you keep going, right, if x3 is bigger than x2, right, or x2 is less than x3, right, in this interval, I could say if these y values are the same, right, if f of x2 is equal to f of x3, right, those y values are the same, then you say f is constant, okay, constant, and I'm going to run out of space here on the interval x2 to x3. Okay, so typically these type of questions, the graphs or the textbook's going to ask you what interval is it increasing or decreasing on, and you would just say increasing on this interval, constant on this interval. Okay, it's always in parentheses. All right, moving right along on our graph, right, for x4 bigger than x3, x3 less than x4, right, if the y value of f of x3, right, f of x3 is greater than the y value of f of x4, right, you say f is decreasing on the interval x3 comma x4. Okay, so always parentheses, we never use brackets, it's always referring to the x interval. All right, so again, intuitively, hopefully that makes sense, right? Increasing, constant, and then decreasing, but you always describe it using x intervals to see where is it increasing, decreasing, okay? All right, so let's take a look at an example here. I think we're on example number 3, so pardon me if I write the example number wrong, but that should be irrelevant here. Okay, it says use the graph shown to describe the increasing and decreasing behavior of the function. Okay, I'll just say identify intervals where function is inc, dec, and constant, if any. Okay, and the function that's provided here is f of x is equal to x cubed plus 3x squared minus 1. Okay, so this one you want to use a graphing utility. Okay, use Desmos. Okay, because I don't expect you to know how to sketch this by hand or graph it by hand. Eventually, I'll ask you guys to sketch it by hand. All right, so roughly the graph, if you go to Desmos, I'm not going to do it here, but I'll just give you the important numbers. The graph's going to look something like this. It's a cubic function. And there's our graph. All right, so before we get into the actual numbers, right? It's like, oh, I actually need some values. I'll get that. If I ask you, where is the function increasing, right? Again, you want to look at your graph. The y values are on your graph. You want to go from left to right on the x-axis, okay? So I want to go this direction, left to right, right? And so if I say, hey, point to me, where is it increasing? You would say, it's increasing right here, right? If I say, where is it? So after it hits this point, whatever that point is, I'll get that number in a second, right? It starts decreasing, right? So maybe decreasing in this area, right? And then once it hits this point, right, it goes up again, and of course it increases. So that's the big picture, right? Just, if you were to describe this to any elementary school student taking math, right, they could probably figure out where is it increasing, decreasing. But now we actually need some numbers, right? We have to use interval notation, and we need to figure out what these specific values are, okay? So I'm going to just tell you from Desmos that this coordinate right here is -2, 3, or any other graphing utility. And you don't really need the y value of this coordinate, right? So the y value is irrelevant, okay? It doesn't ask us to state the domain and range, in which case the domain and range would be all real, okay? So this coordinate, all you know is that this is the y-intercept, and you just need to know the x value, right? The x value right here is just 0. So this is the only point that you need. All right, so we already answered our own question, right? So where is the interval for the function increasing? It's -infinity until it reaches the value of -2. And it's also increasing, right? This coordinate, right, the x value is just 0. And if you're curious, the y-intercept is -1, okay? So I don't really care about the -1. It's increasing from -infinity to -2, union mark, 0 to +infinity. Where is it decreasing? We already pointed that out. On the intervals from -2 to 0, that's where it's decreasing, okay? Constant, guess what? There is no constant. There is no y values where it's the same for a specified interval. So I would just say none. And that will conclude this video on increasing, decreasing, and constant functions.